Alrighty, everyone. It is now 2 minutes past the hour. Let's get started. Today, we'll be talking about bid shading with Beeswax and how you can start saving money with increased transparency and control. You might have noticed that I am not Paul, but I am still wearing the Beeswax hoodie, so I feel like I am a reasonable representative for us here today. So, who am I? I am Albert. I am the Senior Product Marketing Manager here at Beeswax, and joining me today is Shamim, our Chief Product Officer and co-founder. So before we dive right into the topics, let's talk about what the topics themselves are. First topic is just to set the stage. We'll be covering what is bid shading. From there, we'll talk about why bid shading matters, as well as bid shading with Beeswax and the reason I hope you guys are all here today. And then we will close with Q&A. As a reminder, please use the Q&A feature when submitting questions. If you want to use the chat feature to tell me that I'm talking too fast, I will note that I am on the West Coast and have been drinking a lot of coffee, so please feel free to do that if you so choose. So without further ado, let's talk about what is bid shading. Simply put, bid shading is just bidding less to save money in first price auctions as it relates to the programmatic world. If you were wondering about why people are talking about bidding less to save spend on auctions and haven't been doing this since the very beginning of programmatic, well, that's because prior to 2018, it didn't really matter because the primary auction dynamic was second price auctions. If you're unfamiliar with second price auctions are simply the practice of paying 1 cent above the second highest bid. So if the highest bid was $10 and the second highest bid was $8, the highest bidder would only pay $8.01. So in that sense, bid reductions are built into second price auctions. However, starting in 2018, we started seeing a trend towards first price auctions. Unsurprisingly, in first price auctions, the winner is on the hook for the full bid that they put in, which meant that inventory costs skyrocketed for a brief period of time. As a result, bid shading started being offered to kind of compensate for that loss of bid reduction that was built into second price auctions. And what that really kind of ends up meaning is that without bid shading in a first price auction world, you are 100% leaving money on the table. And if that sounds too good to be true, I do want to note that there is a catch. If you are bidding less, that also means you aren't winning as much. It's a bit of a no-brainer if you think about it, but it is an important trade-off to keep in mind because when bid shading is too aggressive, it's entirely possible that you won't be able to deliver your budget in full. However, without bid shading, it's also difficult to spend efficiently, which makes it harder to hit performance KPIs. So that's why bid shading that's what bid shading is. As far as why bid shading matters, bid shading is increasingly important because first price auctions are now the programmatic standard, and we know that this trend is only going to continue to grow. As we were developing our bid shading product, as recently as July, we actually saw a fairly even split in the bid requests that were sent to us. Between first and second price auctions. So 58% first price, 42% in second price. So even in July, first price auctions were already the majority. However, less than half a year later, we saw an almost 20% growth in the span of just 4 months. So what we're seeing now is that the overwhelming majority of programmatic auctions are now first price. And some of our supply partners have also indicated to us that they are going to switch from second price to first price. So we've kind of crossed the Rubicon already on first price versus second price auctions. So it is, again, increasingly important to use features like bid shading to make sure that you are making the most of your spend and making the most of your spend to spend as efficiently as possible. Because when you use bid shading, effectively, you're automatically lowballing all of your auctions. And if you're transacting in millions of auctions a day, like many of our customers do, it's okay to lose a couple here and there to make up for that. It's okay to lose a couple auctions here and there to be able to get those spend efficiencies. So that said, though, we do understand that there is a situational aspect of it with regards to bid shading too aggressively and potentially not being able to spend in full. So that's why at Beeswax, we provide win rate controls, bid shading controls, so you can set the algorithm to operate more or less aggressively depending on the situation. At Beeswax, we like to say that one size fits all fits no one, and that's true when it comes to targeting, and the same is true when it comes to bid shading. Bid shading controls, as I previously mentioned, allow you to change how the algorithm operates. So you can set it to more aggressive to prioritize greater CPM savings over win rates, or you can set it to less aggressive to prioritize maintaining win rates over CPM reductions. So if you're setting it to more aggressive, again, prioritizing CPM over win rates, that's a fantastic option for evergreen campaigns where you have less pressure to deliver your budget in a short time frame, but you probably have more stringent KPIs to hit. Conversely, you can set it to less aggressive, which prioritizes maintaining win rates over CPM reductions, which is fantastic for those high impact branding campaigns where maybe a short flight promotional campaign that's tied to a holiday, where you just need to get in front of as many eyeballs as possible, but still want to be able to make sure you're saving spend and spending effectively. I also do want to note that our algorithms, in addition to being designed to saving money in first price auctions, are also designed to do so without meaningfully changing your inventory mix. In other words, we are not trying to save you money by just buying the cheap stuff. So that's the control that you would expect from Beeswax. Let's talk about the transparency that you would also expect. We do provide full transparency into bid shading performance. So we've got a quick screenshot of our performance report right here. And because it's Beeswax, transparency is part of our ethos. We don't really believe in telling you to just trust us that something is working without offering some sort of proof. As a result, 10% of bids are always going to be held in a control group when bid shading is enabled. And that performance can, again, be easily surfaced via our performance report. So you can just see, so you can easily see how much you're saving as a result of using bid shading. Of course, it's not just full transparency into performance, it is also full transparency into fees. Fees are incurred as 10% of savings and apply only on impressions where we are bid shading. So if we look at our little chart over here, we have a diagram of what an impression with bid shading looks like. So without bid shading, let's say your original bid was $5. When you apply bid shading and we reduce that bid by $1, granting that $1 in savings, we will take 10% of that, or a dime. But again, not every impression in a line item might be bid shaded because there's still 25% of impressions that are second price auctions, or maybe the SSP is doing the bid shading on the buyer's behalf. And so if there's an impression without bid shading, the $5 bid stays at a $5 bid if they win the impression, and no fee is charged. So in other words, we don't make anything unless we're saving you something. So that's the control and transparency of bid shading with Beeswax. Let's talk about how you would actually put it to use. It's super easy. It's literally a single click when you're setting up your line item. So just pretty straightforward. Click the no to yes, and then set up your bid shading controls via the dropdown if you're so inclined. We've seen a lot of success for this while we were developing the product, and one of our clients straight up said that he especially liked the added transparency and control and being able to dial into the right trade-off between win rates and cost savings. So I do want to close by saying that bid shading is better with Beeswax. I might be a little biased, but we did reduce CPMs by an average of 28% during the 2-month beta. If you're already a current customer, just turn it on, start saving money. Again, it's a single click, and maybe 2 clicks if you want to start using bid shading controls to manage your savings versus win rates. Feel free to reach out to your customer success manager or visit our help center to learn more. But I do want to close my bit by, again, stating the words of our clients. Over at Known, they were able to save an average of 43% on the media cost of their banner campaigns, and every single client they included in testing benefited from those changes. So that's all from me. I'd like to switch it over to some Q&A, and again, bring up Shamim, our co-founder and head of product. And fantastic, we already have a question lined up. So the first question is, what is different about Beeswax bid shading in product or fees versus other DSPs?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. Thanks everyone for joining the webinar and taking the time. So there's a couple of things that are different. Albert highlighted them both. So the level of control. So we think it's unique that we give the customer the ability to decide for themselves the trade-off between how aggressive they want to bid shade or not. So in most other systems, there's one setting. In the Beeswax system, you can choose between 3, and we give you that level of control between how aggressively you want to do the trade-off between win rate and CPM savings. And the second is just absolute complete transparency, both at the log level, but also in reporting. So for example, for every single line item that you enable bid shading for, we automatically, without any, you have to do nothing, we create the 10% control group so that you can see very easily in reporting how your test versus control is performing, and you could decide for yourself if that trade-off is worth it, and decide how you want to use the feature.
Thanks, Shamim. Next questions are starting to roll in. Second question is, what factors do you consider when making bid shading bid price? Is it just the publisher and time of day, or does it consider the actual user?
Yeah, it's a good question. So there are several features that are used, and they're different depending on the inventory type. So I won't enumerate all the features, but just to give you a sense, like we have a separate model for video, separate model for banner, separate model for native, et cetera, right? And the video model is taking into account video specific things like the video height and width, in addition to publisher signals and geo and time of day. Whereas the banner is not looking at video width and height, it's looking at banner size and other dimensions that are more important for banner inventory. We do not look at the user. So user is not a feature. It's the features of the media that is being bought, but it's a different set of features depending on the type of media.
Perfect. Thank you, Shamim. And this is fantastic, guys. Keep these questions coming in. Next question is, if you are taking 10% fee for bid shading, does bid shading only apply if using a fixed CPM bid? If using a performance algorithm, then shouldn't it be adjusting bid to deliver the best performance anyway?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we don't, like, for example, if you're using our CPC strategy, which is going, it's effectively going for a CPC target, we don't offer bid shading on that because the algorithm inherently is doing that. So it's only for Beeswax strategies that, if you're using a Beeswax strategy that has a flat CPM bid, like flat CPM or video completion rate, or if you can use it with your own, bid modifiers, bid models, bidding agents as well. So it does depend on the strategy.
Thank you. Next question is, could you please clarify, where do you get the data on bids from so that you can save some money?
Yeah, so this is win data. So, with bid shading, we're not looking at the user, we're not looking at conversion data. This is just in aggregate wins across the system and looking at the features that correlate with those wins. So it is looking at global wins, not looking at the user, not looking at conversions, only looking at data that we have the data rights to.
Great. Next question is, will you always keep the control group fixed at 10%?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Probably, over time, we will likely change that. Like, we may lower that. We may give the customer control for that. I think we started a bit conservative. I would argue 10%, in the long term, as we continue to improve the feature, because we are continuing to improve the models. Maybe too high. We may lower it, or we may give the customer control. Because you can imagine, you can answer likely the same questions with a 1% control group, assuming you're running enough impressions, which would give you an extra 9% of bids that we could apply bid shading to, which would be valuable. So that's something we're looking at.
Great. I actually really like this next question. I think it's a bit of a zinger. Why has the industry adopted this process? Does it not negate the principle of first price auctions generating strong yields for publishers?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a complicated answer. I won't go into all the details, but ultimately, one of the main factors was that with the shift to header bidding on the publisher side, it was effectively being run as a first price auction anyway. So unless, even though auctions were marked as second price, they were behaving as first price auctions. And so it became, the decision between a second price auction and first price auction became, more clear, I think, to communicate the auction as a first price, because it's effectively behaving as a first price. So there's other factors as well. and but that's the primary one.
Fantastic. Another question that we came in through the chat is, what would you say is a win rate in which you are paying too much for a programmatic campaign, and what would be a reasonable win rate using your less aggressive bid shading strategy?
It really depends. There's literally no correct answer for that. I think depending on your bidding strategy, the inventory you're buying, the ad formats you're buying, et cetera, there's some benchmark for that. So I would encourage customers to establish that benchmark. This is the type of inventory I buy and the type of bidding strategy I have. And we give you all the tools to establish that, right? With our bidding report as well as meta markets. You can establish the baseline for your buying, and then you could compare how bid shading affects that. And we give you all that data as well. And you can decide between the trade-off of win rate versus CPM savings. And it's a complex enough, we want to give you the data to make that decision ultimately.
Fantastic. Do you have plans to all for win rate targeting? So increasing bids as well as reducing?
Increasing bids as well as reducing. Right. Interesting. We don't have a specific plan around that. But that makes sense. So you could have, for example, you could give us a win rate target, right? That's the target that you're going for, and you could give us permission to increase our CPM to hit that win rate target. It would work in a similar way as ours. So that's something to consider. Not currently planned, but I'll certainly consider that, and it's a good idea.
Next question is, what would be a reason or when you should consider not using any bid shading?
I mean, I would, the only scenario I would generally recommend using it, like if you're bidding into first price auctions, which you are. So like, unless you are just strictly targeting second price auctions, which we give you that ability to do, then there's no reason to bid shade. If you're bidding into a mix of first price and second price auctions, the only time not to is if you really can't tolerate any reduction in win rate, because you have you're constrained with a fair amount of budget you need to spend in a short amount of time. And if you don't want to take any risk on that, that would be the case not to use bid shading. However, in programmatic, generally speaking, there's such an abundance of inventory that in most cases, the budget you have and the time horizon you can spend it in, even given your targeting, you can afford some reduction in win rate. But the only case to not use it is if you cannot.
Gotcha. Next question is, how does it work out the top price that might have been paid to work out the savings and then the fee of 10%? How are you transparent around that so you know the savings aren't being inflated to boost the fee?
So the question, how do we work out the top price? So it's not the top price, it's your bid. So we literally take the bid price, if we did not touch, and you set the bid price, we're not touching the bid price, right? The customer sets the bid price. There's some clearing price post bid shading, and there's an amount of savings from that. And we're taking 10% of the difference of the savings. So there's no boosting. I may have misunderstood the question. Feel free to ask it in maybe a slightly different way, but there's no boosting of the price or inflation. And also, I also add in logs, you can see exactly, we have enumerated in our raw logs the original bid, clearing price, et cetera. And if you look at our bid logs and win logs, you will see on the log level per impression exactly what we did. And that should give you comfort. And if you have any questions about that, your customer success manager will be happy to help.
Great. Next question. How do you handle having two customers bidding for the same inventory, presumably with the same bid price, if bid shading is activated? Who wins?
If bid shading is activated, right? So, in the case where there's two exact bid prices, and so two exact bid prices, bid shading is applied. Well, ultimately, you know, in that specific scenario, and in the scenario where we do not multi-bid, because there are several exchanges where we'll send multiple bids. So the bidder who doesn't bid shade would win that auction, right? Because they are, I can double check that, but I believe that's the case.
Great. Next question is do you think there will still be second price auctions available, or are they going away completely?
I don't know the answer to that. I think, yeah, I think on some time horizon they'll go away completely. I don't know when that is, but we still have 25%. Yeah, I think on some time horizon they likely will, but I don't know. I don't think it's in the next, 6 months.
Cool. If the average and standard deviation of price paid is out of sync with average and standard deviation of ad quality received, and a buyer suffers the winner's curse, then isn't bid shading a secondary issue that does not solve the winner's curse? For those of you on the line who are not aware of the winner's curse is a dynamic in first price auctions where you're consistently overpaying for something.
Yeah, so if the average buyer suffering winner, then isn't bid shading a secondary issue that does not solve the curse? Maybe I need to think about that. I'm not sure. What I will say is that we're not, so what our algorithm is not doing, it's not changing the impressions you would have bid on, right? It's not seeking out cheaper inventory. There's lots of ways to bid shade, and so one of the strategies people have is within my targeting criteria. There's a set of bids I can make, and there's a set of bids that we know will clear at a lower amount, and there's a separate set of bids that will clear at a higher amount. I'm going to bias towards buying the cheaper stuff in order to save the customer. We believe that's a very bad strategy because it will affect performance. So our strategy is not does not have any bias into the auctions you're bidding. It's going to bid on all of them, and it's going to bid shade different amounts depending on what our model thinks is the right amount, to balance sort of win rate and CPM savings for that auction. So we take a lot of care in the model to ensure that we're not buying different inventory. We also, again, just coming back to transparency, give folks the control in aggregate and in raw logs to validate that we're not buying different inventory, because everything's marked as sort of tested control.
Great. For a second, I thought we were going to have to make I Stumped Shamim hoodies as well, but I think that was a pretty good answer. So the final question that we have right now is, for the Beeswax bidder, would you say the intelligence in the platform, in parentheses, what and how to bid on, is more or less important than the tech in bid shading, i.e. what price to actually bid?
I'm not sure which one is more important than the other. I think there are two very important dimensions to the same problem, right? Like, if you're trying to optimize your campaigns, there's almost three dimensions to it. There's the what you bid on, which say it's sort of targeting. There's how much you bid, which bid shading helps with that second one. And then there's a third, which is around how do you allocate those bids differently with budget. And the third one we try to answer and try to solve for with delivery modifiers. So yeah, I couldn't tell you which one is more important than the other. Like they both need to work together, and which is another reason why we decouple them and allow people to turn bid shading on and off with different bidding strategies.
Fantastic. Those were all the submitted questions. If you have any questions that might show up a little bit later, please reach out to us at bass@beeswax.com. I believe there was that one question, Shamim, that you said you might follow up on, which was how do you handle having two customers bidding for the same inventory? Who wins? If you want to follow up with us directly at bass@beeswax.com, we do encourage you to reach out. So thanks again for your time, everyone. We hope you enjoyed the session.